Okay, so today you're watching the TED Ed video. It's only 3 minutes. Then watch this short video lecture. Complete the study guide directly onto it. Make sure you save your results in print. At the bottom of the study guide, double check. Make sure you understood everything. Submit your PowerPoint. 3 ways. You can compress it and email it. You can leave me a flash drive, or you can transfer to mine. And then finally, turn in your binder bill before you leave for Thanksgiving. I will be coming back today to pick them up. If you do not have yours in the stack, it will be late. Okay, so Unit 6 is Mendel. Mendel is called the father of genetics. Mendel was an Augustine monk in Bern. Here's a picture of where he lived. And if you recall the history of science, history of religion, the two were actually, religion and science it is, went together. So the majority of science was actually studied in the church. So don't be surprised that Mendel is a monk studying genetics. So Mendel, along with his other Augustine monks, they studied a lot of things with agriculture and crops. And Mendel had read a lot about Darwin and Darwin's Origin of the Species and other things published by Darwin and natural selection. And he wanted to try and create a new species through natural selection. He wanted to artificially do this. So, using pea plants, he knew that the stamen, if you transfer pollen from the stamen to the carpel, he could create seeds of plants. So using a little paintbrush, he would brush the stamens, transfer that to the carpel, get seeds, and then he could observe the generation and the traits it observed. And he thought that he could, over time, naturally do natural selection for a particular trait. However, you all should think about this. Is there an advantage to being purple versus white? And there's not. And so you will see that we don't get natural selection. So Mendel, who was trying to create a new species, he didn't. But he did do something much better. He founded and is the base knowledge of genetics. So here are the 7 traits he looked at: color, flower position, seed color, seed shape, pod color, and whether they were tall or dwarf. And Mendel is perhaps the luckiest man. He hit the science lottery, the scientist lottery, he hit it. Because each one of these 7 traits is on a different chromosome. If these traits were on, any of them were on the same chromosome, he would not get the perfect results that he got, or near perfect, I should say. The numbers would not look the same. And we're going to talk more about that why. But he chose an organism, and he chose 7 traits. And each of those 7 traits each of them were on a different chromosome. How he knew that? He didn't. He just got lucky. All right, so here is what he observed. He performed a monohybrid cross. In the parental generation, he had purple flowers and white flowers. He crossed them, and in the first generation, he got all purple. Then he observed that if he crossed ones from the first generation, the second generation, 3/4 of the plants were purple, and the 1/4 of the plants were white. So here, after he made his observations, here's what he needed to explain. So first of all, why did one of the traits, the white color, disappear in the first generation? And then why did that trait, in this case white, reappear in 1/4 of the F2 offspring? So here's what it looks like. So we have a true breeding here. This is purebred purple with purebred white. And you get all purple flowers. But when you cross one of these with another one like these, you get 3/4 of them purple, 1/4 of them white. So if you had 1,000 plants, and Mendel did these tests hundreds and hundreds of times, how many of them would be purple, and roughly how many of them would be white? So these observations led Mendel to 4 hypotheses. You need to memorize these, and you need to know the terminology. So the first one relates to the 3 conditions for natural selection. The idea that you need to have variation. So Mendel hypothesized that genes are found in alternative versions, so variations, called alleles. And a genotype is the listing of alleles that an individual carries for a specific gene. Notice it says carries. You may not always actually see the physical expression of the allele. All right, second hypothesis. For each characteristic, an organism inherits 2 alleles, one from mom, one from dad. If the alleles are the same, it is called a homozygous genotype. Remember, homo means same. If they are 2 different alleles, it is heterozygous genotype. Hetero means different. All right, his third hypothesis. So for the heterozygous, if the alleles are different, he said that the dominant allele is the one that we will physically see. We won't be able to see the recessive, or will have very, very small, minimal effect. We call this physical expression, what we physically see, the phenotype. Do note, the same phenotype can be determined by more than one genotype. Example, let's say we have homozygous dominant. That genotype will look exactly the same as the heterozygous genotype. So both of those genotypes have the same phenotype. And then finally, we have, based on his observations, the law of segregation. So he said that each allele pairs separate from each other during the production of gametes. Remember, gametes are sperm and eggs. So that each sperm and egg only has one allele for each gene. So each living organism, so recap what all this means. Each living organism has 2 alleles, one from mom, one from dad. But when the sperm and eggs are made, you only get one of those alleles. And you can observe this because if this was not the case, you'd have a lot of really weird looking animals and plants and fungi and all kinds of organisms, because this means that one organism could get 2 alleles for a gene and the other organism may get no alleles. And you'd have a lot of really bad sperm and eggs, creating a lot of really weird organisms, leading to probably a lot of infertile and not viable offspring. So this is when we can infer based on what we observe in nature. So here's how that cross looked. So for the parental generation, he took purebred, purple, dominant, homozygous dominant, big P, crossed it with little p, little p. This is homozygous recessive. So all of the gametes got the one, at least a big P, because that's all the parent had to offer. All the gametes of this one got a little p, because again, that's all the parent had to offer. So as a result, when you cross this with this, you end up getting all big P, little b. This is heterozygous. They have the dominant and the recessive. So the genotype is big P, little p, heterozygous, but the phenotype is still all purple. Now, half of these gametes will get big P. The other half will get little p. When these gametes are fertilized, this is what they'll produce. So if we have the sperm is big P and the egg is big P, we get homozygous dominant genotype. The phenotype is purple. If the sperm is big P and the egg is little p, we get heterozygous genotype, big P, little p, and the plant is still the phenotype purple. We see the same thing here. Little p from sperm, big P egg, big P from the egg, homozygous dominant, heterozygous and genotype, and still we have the purple phenotype. However, here, little p from the egg, little p from the sperm, homozygous recessive genotype, but the phenotype here is going to be white. And again, remember, it's 3-to-1 ratio. All right, so let's recap here. What characteristics of science did Mendel use or exhibit? So first of all, he was creative. He was trying something new. He was open-minded to new ideas. He was collaborative because he was inspired by Darwin, so he was reading other scientists' work and trying to do something further with it. Durable. He is the father of genetics. His experiments are still very important today. Tentative. He is considered the father of genetics. However, we know a lot more about genetics, and some of his ideas we know only exist in certain conditions. Remember that whole thing about being on the same chromosome? Curious. There's a lot of research and background on Mendel, a lot of information you can read, and he claims that he was one of the most curious children and that he began comparing himself to his sisters when he was younger. You know, why was he different? Why was he a boy? Why did he look like this? He created laws based on observations. So we have the law of segregation and the law of dominance. Notice these are from his his hypothesis 3, his hypothesis 4. He also made a lot of theories which were based on his inferences. And he was unable to, and this is where some of his research was lacking, he was unable to explain the how or why for his observations. And it's not till much later in more advanced and sophisticated genetics that we can then actually see the way the chromosomes and the genes actually work. All right, that's it. So again, have a great Thanksgiving. Start working on your study guide and make sure you print that out and put it in your notebook.